How's it going?
Great. A little tired from last
Yeah.
week, but good.
What happened last week?
We had the Data Connect conference in Columbus, Ohio. So I think about 60 women speakers and about 1,000 attendees.
That is awesome. We're going to talk more about that in a second. But for people who don't know who you are, do you want to give a quick intro?
Sure. I'm Rehgan Bleile. For those of you who've known me for more than a year, used to be Rehgan Avon, so just changed my last name. I am co-founder and CEO of AlignAI. We're an adoption and governance platform for enterprises, and also founder of Women in Analytics, which hosts the Data Connect conference.
That's super cool. Yeah, so back to the conference now. So 1,000 attendees, 60 speakers. This seems like a lot of work, but I think for a good cause. How do you manage to have a full-time job while also organizing a big conference like that?
Yeah, I hired a CEO like 3 years ago, about a year
Okay.
into running Align AI. I was like, yeah, two things at once, probably not going to be able to make both of them work. So hired a CEO, Kelsey, who's fantastic, and she's been running the organization ever since then. I joined the board when she joined, and I've been very involved still. It's still one of my favorite things to do. It's a labor of love, but I don't have as much time as I used to. So
Oh yeah. I can imagine that. Yeah, and then walk us through what's a line AI?
yeah, so the company started about 4 years ago. My co-founder and I have been. I always like to say we're kind of OGs in the ML ops space. We spent the first portion of our careers thinking about AI governance from an enterprise perspective. So we worked at an ML ops company for a number of years, and then we quit that company to start Align AI because we noticed a lot of the problems were actually people problems, not technical problems, and so we wanted to address that with the new organization. So yeah, we focus on two sides of the same coin, like how do we govern AI and how do we adopt it? So what is it doing? How do we align it to our objectives and values and goals? And at the same time, how do we ensure that it's actually doing that?
Hmm. How do we govern AI?
It's the $1 million, maybe $1 billion question
Well, according
at
to some
this
people, maybe a
point.
$7 trillion question. I don't know.
Right. $1 trillion. Yeah, 7 trillion. Um, it's complex, right? Because when we talk about governing, it's contextual. So when I talk to a bank versus when I talk to a retailer, they care about very different things in terms of governing AI. And mainly because there's external pressures of governance and regulation, there's internal pressure from risk teams, there's publicity pressure from the external facing lens of the company's brand and what they're doing from a value perspective. And then there's an alignment challenge in terms of what we want them to ultimately do. And when I say them, I mean AI systems. So I think governance is all of those things. It's putting the right oversight and process in place to be proactive and then monitor
Hmm.
reactively.
That's interesting. It's governance is always one of these things where I feel like it's a word that's used a lot in our industry. What does governance mean to you? Because I think it means a lot of things to a lot of people.
Yeah, it's a loaded term. I honestly thought about just nixing the word governance from the description of what we do because it is
Mm.
super loaded. And it to a lot of people means oversight, process, auditability, like it means all of these things, and that's true. But really, I think, like I mentioned, for me, like governance is just what are we setting up to make sure that this thing doesn't fail, and how do we have the right sorts of oversight to ensure that we catch when it does fail and we can correct it. So I often refer back to the electrical grid, like what sort of governance do we have in place to make sure the grid doesn't go down, right? That is one of our biggest, areas of focus to make sure we have electricity and we can turn our lights on or we can run a hospital. And so I think about that when it comes to AI as we start to embed this more into these critical functions. How do we ensure that it's on, it's working as it should, and we can monitor that and fix it immediately if it does deviate?
Hmm. Yeah, I think that's sort of the central question of our time right now. I mean, so you're in the ML ops back when that was a term. Now I guess it's AI ops or LLM ops or whatever.
Right.
But so you've been in the space for a bit. Like, what have you seen change in terms of companies uh, approaching things like governance?
Yeah, I think most organizations that did it were regulated. So they were required.
Mm,
So, like the Fair Lending Act, right? So if you're a bank or if you're in financial services, there are just certain guidelines you have to abide by. So there's certain things you can't use in models, and there's certain checks that you have to have in place before models are produced to make sure that you're not um, accidentally biased by proxy for some of the features you incorporated. So there's certain checks that they would do like at the feature level. And a lot of it was more cut and dry. These are your like pretty standard ML models that they're deploying. So you're running very basic tests. You're doing everything pretty manually because these are not really automated pipelines. And so I think governance from that kind of not old school, but I guess at this point, lens is a little bit more cut and dry. Whereas you've got these really complex systems now and a lot of things that are automated and these kind of live reinforcement learning systems, which are a lot harder to think through.
yeah, yeah, and now you obviously have plug and play large language models and other generative capabilities. And I guess I think a big question a lot of companies have is um, whether they should rely on third parties, maybe like OpenAI, Anthropic, and so forth. How do you approach that with clients?
So I work with a lot of large enterprises, some of which are very technically capable and some of which have not invested because they haven't had to or haven't had a need to.
Mm,
So I think when it comes to the technical capabilities internally, you start asking questions like, do we have the ability to build our own models? Do we have the data to train our own models? Do we have the systems in place to deploy our own models? Most of the time, the answer is no. And so then we end up leaning on these external organizations like, OpenAI's API or leveraging the Microsoft ecosystem or leveraging these point solutions that are leveraging those APIs. So it just really depends on how much you've invested in this domain internally, how much you can support, how sensitive your information actually really is, how much you're planning on using AI as a differentiating factor for you as a company. There's all of
mhm.
these different lenses in which you think about building versus buying.
Right. Makes a lot of sense. I want to get your take on this. It seems like the term AI is, you want to talk about loaded terms. It feels like AI is now synonymous with generative AI or large language models. Do you find that this causes confusion with your clients?
For sure. I actually have gotten into a lot of philosophical debates about how you define AI
Interesting.
because there's this idea of intelligence, then you make the intelligence artificial, and then you talk about like general intelligence, and then you talk about, what consists of the term intelligence. Generative specifically is like a thing inside of AI, right? And so when I talk about AI with larger companies, I usually start with what is intelligence? How do you define it? And I use the fun like Einstein versus a mushroom example where mushrooms are actually quite intelligent. They can communicate with each other. And, then there's your when people think of intelligence, sometimes they think of the most intelligent individual that they can think of, like an Einstein. And so are we saying, anything that resembles a level of intelligence, what kind of intelligence? Or are we saying
Mm,
the most intelligent thing at a very specific task that you can think of? And so when we start talking about that, people start to understand, okay, this is what we're talking about when we say the word intelligence. And then when we make it artificial, how do we get computers to emulate or simulate those individual tasks that we either, feel that a human can do, a plant can do, an animal can do. And then we start getting into the types of tasks, which is like talk or write. That would be a generative application of intelligence. So that's usually how I talk about it, is kind of breaking it down by terms, because otherwise we can get all hung up on, well, if it doesn't have reinforcement capabilities, then it's not really intelligent. And, we can go down the rabbit holes.
That's really interesting. And I suppose the other elephant in the room is, does every company need to do AI right now?
I kind of think so. I know this might be a controversial idea, and I
Mhm.
and I think there are some people out there saying it so that they can make more money for their company. So disclaimer. But I think so, because even at the most basic of tasks, you can use AI to streamline what you're doing. And I know people are incorporating it into their personal lives, but um, I use it from a productivity perspective all day, every day. Inside of our company, we're AI native in the sense that we use it for
Yeah.
tons of different things. And so I don't think you have to have this like massive differentiating solution of AI implemented in your company to say you're doing AI. I think a restaurant could use it. I think anyone could use it.
hmm Yeah, I know. And I started a new company recently, and yeah, I view it as being AI native. I'm trying to figure out ways to involve it in every process where it makes sense. So I just think well, why not? So,
For sure. Like we use it for our quarterly all hands. It's one of my favorite applications of it. We use it for brainstorming. We use it for feeding all of our notes in from our conversations to create project tasks for next quarter. We think about using it for KPIs and analyzing, how we did on certain projects last quarter and what we can project for the next quarter. We use it for pretty much everything. Lots of strategic tasks, lots of little tasks. Anywhere we can, we're leveraging it.
hmm So yeah, we run, I guess, AI native companies, but what about the vast majority of companies that are not, I would even say digitally native? You know, I mean, some of them still use fax machines for God's sake. But
Right.
what is it like, when you're talking to, I guess maybe I don't want to say legacy, but more mature companies about modernization, and this could be AI, this could be whatever, but what do you have a playbook when you're talking to these more mature companies?
Yeah, I'd say so. There's kind of like a different spectrum too. You've got your large enterprises that have even your Fortune thousands who have not really even dabbled in AI much.
Yeah,
And then you also have your smaller companies. Like my dad runs a machining shop and fabrication shop. He sits, he welds and works with metal all day long, and he can use AI for quotes and things like that, back office work. But for the large enterprises, a lot of them don't realize how many inefficiencies they have in their process that they do every single day across different functions. Oftentimes, we're thinking of the core IP, but like, what about your sales team? What about your marketing team? What about your customer success team? Right? These are like very
yeah.
common applications of AI. That you can leverage AI for. And I always start with just a general literacy overview for the leaders so they can start thinking
Mm,
about it strategically and putting a plan in place for their workforce.
that's really interesting. What does that literacy piece look like? I'm always curious about literacy efforts.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think the word literacy also is not great for some people, and others don't mind it so much. But when we talk about it, I usually reference it as literacy just as a general kind of like foundational layer for folks. When we do talk about it, I start with like a core team. So if you try to get tens of thousands of people educated on something, everybody then expects that that company is now going to support all of these different tools and they're going to onboard all of these different things for that company to use. And that's usually not the case. So you can't like get people stoked about something and then say, by the way, we haven't approved of any of these tools, so you can't use anything. So like sit on your hands until we're ready. And so I always say, like, get all of that stuff ready first. Like, how are you going to approve of new projects? What happens when 600 people start emailing you and saying that they want to use this AI tool or that AI tool? Like, are you ready for that? And usually the answer is no. So I always say create some
mm,
layer of foundation and some literacy for your leadership team or whoever's leading the charge there, and then come up with a larger plan on educating folks of what is AI, how can you use it safely, what are some examples, really break it down to its basics, and then give them an action of how they can get involved.
That makes sense. Yeah, I know. I also run a consultancy as well, and I think a lot of the challenges I've seen stem from I think a lack of aligned expectations, especially among different leaders and departments, and a lot of the problem stems from a lack of shared vocabulary. And so I think AI is one of these things where it means a lot of things to a lot of different people, but people also want to be doing AI. I think if you're seen as sort of a curmudgeon in that or not doing it, um, it's not the best look. So you look at a bit stodgy, but I think it means a lot of different things. Like, I talk to some business leaders and they want to have some version of like Skynet just running their entire company, which I don't know that technology exists just yet, but um, and others I think are a bit more pragmatic. But there's definitely like I think a big gradient between the two, which is always fascinating. It's sort of like a Rorschach test in some ways. So
For sure. Yeah. I think people do have this misconception of what it is and what they need to do with it. We usually tell organizations to kind of cut their teeth with Microsoft Copilot, although I think it's
mm,
actually kind of good because it underperforms in a lot of ways, which is a good thing to expose people to. There's actually this tolerance and expectation setting of like when these things are wrong and what that means and how you can deal with that. So I actually think it's kind of fun to expose people to how they're wrong and get people used to that because then they have better expectations and then all there is up from there. So you can start
that's
introducing
funny.
things that are more useful.
I did that last year with my kids' sixth grade class. I came in to talk about AI to a bunch of sixth graders, and it was a lot of fun. I think it was one of the best talks I gave all year last year. But what I thought was interesting was when you asked the group of kids what they thought AI was, there were things like, I think unanimously they were saying it's going to take over, and I'm like, what do you mean by that? It's like, well, it's going to take everything away and it's going to rule everything. And it's like, that's interesting. Maybe it will in the future, but let's play with ChatGPT. So I busted out on my phone, and for the next hour, you know, I think they started understanding the boundaries of sort of where it was effective. I think this was, I don't know if it was 3.5 or 4 at the time, but um, I think they came out definitely a bit more sober, uh, with I think a better understanding of sort of like you say the where it's good and where it underperforms because it underperforms a ton in quite a few areas. I would say maybe it'll not be the same in the future, but for now, that's the reality of it. So, but I think there's but what I thought was also interesting um, was with kids. I think they immediately realized they could use it for their homework. So that was like I think the big epiphany. So I think that may have pissed off the teacher, but whatever. Um, but when you go to adults, for example, right? And I can't remember what the article was I was reading, but the vast majority of adults, I think they did a study in the UK and the US, but most people haven't even heard of ChatGPT or any of this stuff. So that was pretty
Oh,
interesting. I think it was yeah, I need to figure out the numbers, but I think it was over half of people weren't aware that the stuff even existed at all. So, and I showed ChatGPT to my dad a couple months ago. He had never heard of it, and he's like, this thing's the dumbest thing I've ever seen in my life. So, but he's also like 70. So, 'cause I think he asked it a question and I got it wrong. It's like, never mind. What's the point of this? I'll go. So it is
I
interesting because I think in our because I think in our tech bubble, I guess is what I'm saying is like we have a lot of I think we're in it so often that we sort of take it for granted, but then you realize like there's both young and old who and people our age too who yeah I would say have yeah at best a cursory overview of it, if even an overview at all of what it is. So still
100%. Yeah. I think it's so interesting that a lot of these tech folks, which is really fascinating, who are building these systems, just automatically expect people to know how to use this. We've done a lot of trainings for individuals at enterprises, and one of the things that people forget is like there are a lot of people that don't even know how to open up Microsoft Word online, like not the app on
yeah.
your computer. So how are you expecting them to be a prompt engineer to like leverage this tool and know what a prompt is and know how to prompt this thing and know what to use it for. Like, that's crazy. So when they spit out all of these numbers around adoption of these tools, I have a really hard time believing that, because you're probably looking at a very small percentage of people at a company who have the tolerance to experiment, understand what it does and how it can be useful, can see the bigger picture, know how to identify when it's wrong, have the discipline to come back to it all the time. It's pretty low.
Oh yeah, and that's a cognitive dissonance, because I think when you read stats from a lot of tech vendors that are now turned into AI vendors, it's like, like 60+% of companies in the world are using some sort of AI, and it's everywhere and so forth. But then when you look at the workers at these companies, for one, I kind of doubt those stats. I don't think it's that widespread. I mean, but it's 'cause I think it depends on what you define as an AI application as well. Like
Right.
um, you can make an argument that Microsoft Office or Google Workspace, because it has AI capabilities, is now an AI app. But that also doesn't mean people are using it. That just means you have the potential to use it. Um, but I mean, I can't even tell you how many times I go into companies and people, like you say, they can barely open up Word online, or even still like basic stuff like knowing how to use a spreadsheet. Like that's still one of those crazy things that you would think everybody knows how to do. Nope, not even.
Yep.
Not even.
Yeah. I mean, even today I was
Like people doing
struggling
averages, like
Teams.
literally physically. Oh, well, that's never mind. I'll be nice. So it's a great product. So,
Uh-huh.
uh, terrific. Um, yeah, but it's interesting. So, I mean, I think before we started too, you say one of your biggest, one of the biggest things that you do is the people part of working with AI. What walk us through that? Like, what's the people part of working with AI?
Yeah, there's a bunch of lenses to that. So one is the education piece, which we touched on quite a bit. The other is this actual true hesitancy to want to leverage these types of tools as an individual. So for example, this was like 7 years ago, maybe. My co-founder and I were at the MLOps company that we were working with, and we were working for a bank, and we were building a model that clustered municipal bonds and then did price predictions off of that. And we would sit down on the trading floor and talk to some of the traders, or some of the other folks in the operation side of the business. And I remember going in to do some testing with them, and we walked onto the floor, and the guy was like, great, these are the people that are trying to get rid of us and automate our jobs.
Oh
And this
boy.
is like pre-Gen AI boom, right? So he's like, you're building this auto trading platform that is supposed to do what I do every day. So there's just a lot of hesitancy for people to want to adopt a tool like that. And not only that, but you're like, oh, you're here to like gain my institutional knowledge, train a model to do what I do and all the knowledge I've acquired over my entire career. And then I'm supposed to do what? Click the button when I think it's wrong. So like I think some people are trying to figure out like, where is my role? And everyone keeps saying, well, we still need all the domain experts, we still need all the people to like guide these models. And okay, sure, but what does that look like? I don't think anybody has really shown what that looks like in a good way yet.
No, they haven't, and that's I think one of the issues that um, I think people are rightfully hesitant in that scenario. I mean, how would you feel in that situation, right? And I heard, who was the OpenAI CTO, Mira Murati. I mean, she made some comment like a few weeks ago. I think that she got a bit of flack about like, a lot of the jobs are going to be automated by generative AI. Maybe they shouldn't have existed in the first place. And I think that, part of me I thought it was a bit of a flippant comment. And my argument is, yeah, but you also like took everybody's work and trained a model on it, and now you expect them to do what exactly?
Yeah.
I'm an author. I'm on the fence of whether I want my works in large language models or not. I think that it's, but that's but you're gearing up for the reality where that's just going to be the case. But I thought, but the question is like, what? Okay, so say theoretically, yeah, a lot of people are, whatever they did was now automated. Well, yeah, what are they supposed to go do? Like you say, click the button, which only trains the model to be better at the thing.
Right?
Um, yeah, I mean, these. I think this is one of the fundamental questions of our age that will need to be grappled with, and I don't think enough people are asking these questions because they're just like, well, let's just throw everything in there and see what happens. Um,
Yeah. And I mean, I think we are far away right now, just given the usability of these tools from
oh yeah,
this existential disruption in the workforce. I think it'll happen. Like it'll be a boiling the frog situation where it'll be very subtle and very consistent. Um, and I think what's interesting is everyone's like, see, it's not going to take my job away, but that's only because it doesn't perform very well. So, like for example, we
yeah,
build a lot of playbooks for companies on their standards and policies for AI. And everyone's like, well, why can't AI just do that? Why can't I just go into ChatGPT and say, give me a security policy for AI at my company? Because if you do that, it's a really shitty security policy. And it's not comprehensive and it doesn't address the things that you needed to address. And you would spend a lot of time trying to do more research and look at resources. And does it create an initial good outline for you? Arguably, maybe it gives you false confidence that it's a comprehensive outline, and you're missing things. And so the reality is they're not that good yet. And you have to fill in the blank, and you do need people who are experts. But what happens when it does get to be that good?
hmm
I don't know.
That's a good question. Um, yeah, and it will. I mean, I'm betting that it will. I don't know if it happens
Yeah.
to the current approaches of large language models or if there's something, different, but there's enough attention and enough work in this where things will continue to evolve. I don't see any reason why they wouldn't. Um, like there's, in the software engineering space, there's Devin and other, agentic workflows, even Claude's artifacts, sort of mimics that in some respect, but, that's, I mean, it's super early days, but, you've been around the block, you know how these things go. It's super early. It sucks until it doesn't, and then it's awesome. So
Yeah.
that's reality of it. Like I already know software engineers that are very apprehensive about the future, but that's it is what it is. So
Yeah. I'd love to see this kind of movement with AI help with the data ecosystem. Like, I think there's
mm,
still so many opportunities for data quality improvement, process improvement, integration improvement, software improvement on just collecting and curating and storing and modeling data. And
yeah.
I don't know exactly what that looks like, but I feel like that's a really good place to focus, especially if you're one of these legacy enterprises. Like, how do we leverage this to make our data better?
Oh yeah. I mean, imagine how much data exists in most enterprises, right? A lot. Um, yeah, and I feel like yeah, you're absolutely right. I've been thinking a lot about this too. I mean, I'm writing a book on data modeling right now. Um, and part of it is I feel like in the data space, I think practitioners need to understand the ways of working with data, which I think that's also been ignored. So you kind of have this double whammy of like technology, which left unbridled will just sort of do whatever the hell it does. But you also need to understand, um, how to manage the inputs and potentially outputs of these models, but the inputs to the models for sure, as well as the inputs to reports and everything else you're currently doing. But data is generated at such a scale that I'm unconvinced that the current approaches of data management, governance, and so forth is adequate for tomorrow's world. I mean, I'm looking at the Dama Book of Knowledge over there. Wonderful book. Kidding. But it's like 600 pages of stuff, right? And so of practices that were I think ordained by committee. It's great, but when I listen to data management professionals and I speak at their conferences and listen to them, it's the same tired tropes over and over again. Like we need to get more value from our data, and we need to prove to the business that we're um, managing data and governance. I feel like I'm at like an old veterans, you know, I don't know, like the VFA or something, just having a beer with people just ranting about the same stories over and over, um, which I used to do. But I mean, this is like the state of the industry. It's the same decades of the same shit we've just been like hammering on over and over again, and like nothing's happened. Nothing's happened at all. They have these conferences every year about data management. It's like nothing has happened, and I totally agree. I feel like if AI can at least help scale to introspect data sets, to provide rules and and those types of workflows, like I'm all for it because the current approach is certainly not working. We've been talking about the same
100%.
stuff for decades.
Yeah. And I mean, I run into a lot of data governance, data management, data quality discussions in my work, right? Because
Sure.
AI is nothing without data. So we obviously touch on a lot of data
Hmm.
concepts. And one of the things that's so incredibly frustrating to me, but is the way that the industry has decided that we're doing it, is this like stewardship idea of like
Mm.
being the labeler
Yeah.
and trying to dump all of your domain knowledge into this like catalog or whatever. It's just like the crazy, it's almost like I keep explaining it to people. Like if you just set somebody loose and their new job is to go into every storage unit at this storage facility and they have a labeler and they get to label all the boxes, like look in the box, see what's in there, write the label out, label it. You're going to do that all day, every day. Like that's your job. And I just feel like that's wild.
Hmm. Yeah, give me
So
PTSD. I actually had to go. I actually have some storage buildings and stuff, and I had to go clear one of them out of my own stuff. And I was like, this is possibly the worst job ever. First, you realize how much crap you accumulate over the years, and second, it's like there's stuff. No, I think it's an apt description because I was just sitting there like, yeah, I can empathize with that. That's a pretty shit job. Um, but yeah, I mean that goes on for eternity, right? And you're talking about structured data too. There's also
right.
unstructured data, text data and all this other stuff in the enterprise that has sort of just been really left unmonitored, which I'm sure has a lot of value in it too. Yeah, that's actually it. It's just yeah, I the steward thing's always bugged me a bit. Like that word, you know?
Same. I feel like this is a real AI is a really good opportunity to help us with some of this stuff too, because when you dig into it, also, there's this piece of data that came from this system somewhere, and that system was configured in XYZ way, and some admin somewhere knows about it, but they have no idea what that system is operationally being used for. And that's when we run into all of these data quality problems, or we run into this
Mm,
lack of context, or we run into whatever, or there's too much freedom in the system for you to capture the information. And I feel like we could solve that with, generative AI by grabbing context or being able to understand or capture the process in which the data is being collected, and do a lot more automation from that perspective.
yeah, absolutely. Is that something you're suggesting to clients then? Is to explore AI from that angle?
Yeah, I have absolutely talked to people about doing that, because if you think about the context that you're trying to capture, it's oftentimes in meetings or in conversations or in a document somewhere, very unstructured. If we could summarize it and find it and search on it and put it somewhere in a more automated fashion where we're not having people manually go through it, I think that's a great use of time or a great investment, right? Because it's really hard to get funding for data cleanup projects or quality improvement
Oh, it's
projects, or
impossible.
so why not use AI to get funding for that
We're
project?
get use AI to get funding for AI. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's where we are. Like I said, because the other approaches, I mean, you talk to governance and data management people, and it's like here's the deal. Like if I see people who have been doing that kind of job for decades in the same company, it tells me one of two things. Either it's been working, in which case things operate silently and great and so forth, but overwhelmingly it's the opposite. It's like. you've been pushing a rock up the same hill for 20 plus years. I mean, to me, that seems a lot like toil.
For sure. I was just gonna say I would give them a hug. That sounds
Yeah, they need a
brutal.
hug. They need a hug.
Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe, yeah, get him, yeah, like an AI friend or something. Being a bit snarky, but I mean, it is true because I feel like there's a lot of energy in the data industry that goes into, um, a lot of this. I don't say doomsaying per se, but it definitely feels like it's almost like sort of the data management, data stewardship industrial complex exists, um, and it doesn't need to be this way, or it shouldn't. But I think part of the problem is too, though, it's also a lack of, I think, institutional knowledge. Like you say, you use the word literacy, perhaps we can call it that, but just understanding of how to work with data. So, often this is the fault. I would say not intentionally, but of people upstream, maybe working in IT on applications or building applications that provide data, and they're often none the wiser on the analytical impacts, for example, downstream, and now AI impacts. And so, but this, and companies don't want to, invest in training because like, why do that? So, yeah, it's a crazy
Yeah.
world.
Yeah. I mean, and I often talk about this too on the governance front. I'm glad you mentioned that because some people like to talk about governance as if everything is automated already. I have never walked into a company where everything is automated. So if you want to talk about like putting monitoring in place, capturing all of this metadata, that's great. If you have every single thing automated at your company, let me know because it's a miracle. But like the reality is that most systems, even if it's building a model, pushing it in a prod, collecting data, entering it into the system, they include a person. The person has variability in what they're doing. And there's typically not an error prone or error proof way of interacting with that system that keeps people from deviating from a standard. That's where you get quality issues, lack of context, things that deviate, right? That's what we're looking for from a governance perspective. So when we talk about ideal state, everything's automated, we can troubleshoot it, we can dig into the code, we can change the logic, we can push that out to everything, great. But the reality is that's not the case. And so what happens, what's your governance plan for the parts that are not automated? You mentioned like data literacy as a core piece of that. Well, that is important because you have bank tellers who are entering data into systems, right? And what do they care about where the data goes and who uses it and what models leveraging it or what dashboards presenting it? They don't. And so there's some level of education, some level of informing the person who's responsible for that piece of data, what they're supposed to do with it and why they should care. So I think we're in the same boat with AI when we talk to people about governance. Everyone is expecting all of this stuff to be automated. And do you have all of these things that are automated together?
Yeah.
And it's like, well, there's a people piece of this too.
That's a massive one. I mean, if a bank teller wants to add more zeros to my deposit, that's terrific. They should totally do that. So
It's great.
those are good mistakes to make. You should always do that. Just kidding.
Totally.
We're not endorsing fraud here.
Right.
Just accidents. Kind of switching gears a bit, back to your conference. Something I've been thinking about lately, this is an issue that actually came up with me about a month or two ago, but women in tech, women in data, right? And it's something that's been on my mind. I get asked to speak at a lot of conferences and be on panels, and I think the most recent one I was invited to be on a manel. I think it was like 8 dudes. I gave up my spot so they could go find somebody who's not one of the others.
We thank you.
Yeah, of course. But it got me thinking too. So you found 60 women speakers out there for your latest conference, which is awesome. But why is it that women? I feel like there's a lot of women in the data industry.
Mm-hmm.
Where are they getting the opportunities to speak at conferences and get onto panels? I think the representation issue has been something a lot on my mind lately. Love your take on that.
Yeah, I have spent the last 8 years of my life thinking about this since I started the conference because we were very intentional about the purpose of the event. So I think it's one thing to just like create spaces for women to
Yeah.
be productive. And I think that's great. We should do that. We decided to tackle a very specific problem, which was visibility. And it's to this point because when I first went down this rabbit hole 8 years ago, I realized that, over 50% of individuals in statistics in an academic sense were women. So that was very telling to me because stats is a core piece of analytics and AI specifically. The problem was in computer science that there was a drastic underrepresentation, and the industry at large became very CS heavy in the last decade. So mainly because compute has been the constraint. So we've expected our data scientists who are PhDs in math and stats to also be programmers and understand how the compute level works. And so there's been less women in the industry because of that. But on top of that, with the opportunities to give visibility, how do they do that? So they can write research papers, they can speak at conferences, they can write books and author books. And that's how we get more voices of diverse individuals out there. Well, we were like, okay, how do we fix the conference part first? So let's create a stage where all of our speakers are women or gender diverse individuals, and the attendees are whoever, we don't care. And we're there to specifically bring the best of the best on the stage, talking about the best topic, the most desired topic, and we want as many people to show up as possible. And what I learned in running conferences is that a lot of conferences don't accept speakers if they've never spoken at an event before. So then we get this really kind of recursive problem where now none of these conferences are searching for women because they're not on these speaker lists, because what they do is pretty lazy. They go to another conference page and they look at the speakers from their conference, and then they invite them to theirs. So what we decided to do was create a speaker group and not a bureau, but speaker academy is the word I'm looking for, where we have a professional coach come in and train professionally any of our speakers up until the event. So if you've never spoken at a conference before, but you're really deep in this space and you have a lot of expertise, but you're afraid to get on a stage because you don't know how to present the materials, we will help you and take care of that. That way we get more people in the speaking circuits, they have more assets to apply to more conferences, and we can just get more and more women into the space. So that's what we did as an event.
That's really interesting. And what were some of the learnings of that? Did that work out initially, or was there?
Yeah. So
Okay, that's
actually,
cool.
our studio hosts a conference, and they saw us doing that, and then they reached out to our speaker coaches we used for our academy, and they started doing that for their event as well. But what we noticed was, I think about 30 to 40% of our speakers every year had never spoken at a conference before. So we
Oh, wow.
have that number of new women getting into kind of the speaking circuit, which is fantastic. And then on top of that, those women that did participate in that who have spoken before felt more confident speaking at bigger conferences or larger events. And they all met each other. So we create this really nice group where they can actually do business together and they can partner on things, or they can find customers, or, they can actually create kind of a community and cohort of individuals. So it also is insurance for me as a conference planner that I know every speaker shows up prepared. And we get comments from our attendees every year that we have really excellent curated content, because every speaker I know for a fact has gone through that experience.
Hmm. That is interesting. Because that lazy approach that you mentioned, where organizers will just go to another conference and take the speaker list off of that. I've spoken at enough conferences and been to enough conferences where I feel like that is definitely a lazy way, in more ways than one. One, it kind of is this self-fulfilling feedback loop, but two, there's a number of speakers out there who I hate to say it, but they aren't that good. Um, but they for whatever reason they keep getting invited back to speak, and maybe it's because they can draw an audience because of their persona, but the talks are whatever. So that's an observation I've had of speaking at already countless conferences at this point, but yeah, it is interesting. But it also feels like at a lot of conferences that women are sort of treated as, like, you got to have, you got to fill out your diversity quota, right? Like, I got to have my token woman on the stage, and bonus points if she's from a minority group, because that'll make me look a lot cooler with
Yep,
everybody. And I think it's super disingenuous.
for
So
sure. 100%.
yeah,
Yeah, we actually have a very strict process of accepting speakers. There are people who have applied many years in a row and have not gotten accepted to our conference. So we have a really high bar, and I think every conference should. I just think they're not looking in the
yeah.
right places.
Oh
And they
no,
frankly don't care about the content, for being honest. Like, there's a lot of conferences that are there to make money off of sponsors and collect a bunch of people to get them into a room so the
yeah,
sponsors can
oh
talk
yeah.
to them. So they don't care about the content. They just want you to show up, and they want the logo and the name and the title and whatever. So,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. The conference circuit's a fascinating one.
yeah,
Yeah, it's I'm still trying to wrap my head around it, because you go, I mean, everywhere I go in the world too, it's definitely some version of what you described. Like I've been to, some of the biggest conferences in the world over in the Middle East, and it just felt like they're stuffing as many vendors in there as possible.
yep,
Um, Talk spaces were microscopically small, which, you're talking a conference like hundreds of thousands of people, so not a small event.
right.
Um, and you're like, yeah, you show up to the stage and you're like, huh, all right, cool. I'll talk to the five people here. This is great. So, but
Yeah,
yeah,
it's really rough. And on top of that too, sponsors only want to talk to people who have budget. And just so happens
yeah,
there's not a ton of women in positions who have budget, just in general. I don't care if you're in tech or not.
yeah,
And so that's also a problem. I just think it's where people's focus is, which I get. A lot of these are in to make money. And,
yeah,
there's some people who are not huge fans of going to conferences. I love them. My network has expanded drastically. I live in Ohio. We don't have a, mega booming ecosystem of AI here. So I love going to conferences and meeting new people and growing my network and revisiting cities and having people to talk to when I go to those cities. And I'm, a big
yeah.
traveler, so I like that. And I think it's been extraordinarily helpful in my career. So that's my opinion, but I know not everybody is,
I feel the
motivated
same
by that.
way. I mean, I live in a, sort of a backwater. I live in Salt Lake City. Same thing. Um, a different place, but it's not the tech mecca, right? And so, whereas if you go to the Bay Area, there's like 20 AI meetups at night. I think literally. Um, it's like there's almost too much going on there. I mean, if you actually wanted to get really good dinner every night, you could just go to meetups there.
Totally.
So, but yeah, it's one of those things that I'm conscious of. Is I'm organizing a few conferences as well, not for myself, but for helping other people with their conferences. So I'm always trying to be mindful of like who's going to be genuinely a value add, but not just as a token ad, but like somebody who actually has something to say, who also may come from a diverse background. So that's a balancing act. Because again, I think if you're trying to get if you're just trying to get representation for its own sake, I think it actually backfires in some ways, because people can see through that too. They're
100%.
just like, yeah, now you just look really stupid.
Yep.
So
Yep. Or you put a bad taste in people's mouth about it. Like, okay, great. They had a few women speakers. I went to those sessions. They were the least informational or least quality ones. And now, yeah, of course. You know what I mean? Like, it does backfire. It
yeah,
is actually pretty harsh.
yeah, it can be for sure. Yeah, but it's something that's pervaded the tech and data industry for as long as I've been in it, for a couple plus decades now. And so, yeah, but it's getting better though. I would say,
Mhm.
back in the day, well, data wasn't cool for one. So you just had that going against you in general. But like, um, I don't think there weren't that many women in the space back in the day. Now I think I think the democratization of data science, especially in the last decade, really opened the door to a lot of people, because they could potentially get a very lucrative career. Um, working in data just happened to be the field that was in. But I think there's it's definitely changed a lot, I would say, for the better. The industry has, but there's still a long way to go. Like literally after this, after we record, I'm talking to a group, and we're going to talk about who we're going to have for speakers, right?
Mhm.
That's so it's that's an interesting one, but
Well,
looking
come
forward to
on
it.
by the Data Connect conference page because we have a list of all of our previous speakers on there.
I'll do that. I'll do that. Yeah, you had my bestie Sol Rashidi. She was speaking at your
Yeah,
conference, I guess. She keynoted. So
she
um,
did.
yeah, she gives good talks. Uh, but talking to her, I mean, it's interesting because I feel like she's been around from the beginning, from the dark ages. And she's telling me just horror stories of being a woman in this industry back in the day, and
Yeah.
and the fact that even if you try and get to the C level like she has, it's how many women are running companies?
Yeah, I can tell you
Not
not
that
many.
many.
I was talking to a couple of folks that I've connected with, women I've connected with in this space, being a woman entrepreneur in AI or data, um, raising capital, VC backed. Like, there are
Yeah.
not a lot of them. I can tell you that
No.
for sure. We run a showcase, startup showcase at the event as well. Sadie from Women in Data hosts it.
Oh yeah,
And
she's red.
at our event, yeah, she's phenomenal. And so we talk about it all the time. Like, how do we get more women founders who are also in data and AI, who are not just, who are part of the founding team, not just on at the startup, And
Yeah.
it's hard. It's even smaller of a number.
Yeah. I mean, it's just simply math. There's just like
Yeah.
there's not that many, and I hope that changes. But again, it feels like it is. I think entrepreneurship is like becoming more normalized. It's not just dudes starting companies anymore. And so that's
No, the new
it's
AI
cool to see.
boom is a lot of dudes starting companies. So.
Well, they used to be crypto bros, to be frank. So now
True.
they learned how to spell AI, so
That's
they're
right.
they're in, they're in it now. But once this thing fizzles out, they'll be on to the next thing, whatever that is.
For
So
sure.
yeah, it's fascinating to see. Well, kind of closing out, is there anything you're excited about? Kind of the rest of this year going into 2025 as well?
Yeah, I think things are getting really real for companies when it comes to AI. I mean, we've been talking very high
Mm,
level for about 2 years now, a year and a half, and that's fine, but things are getting real. People are trying to take things to prod. Like, they have actual
yeah,
models that they've built, things they've trained, techniques that worked, didn't work, testing they're doing. Like, that's where I start to get super excited, because that's where the fun starts for me, is like the craziest. Like, actually, Sol said that in her keynote. It's how many people actually have stuff in prod, just not a
yeah,
lot. So that's exciting for me. I'd say, like, that big trend. There's more budget getting opened up from enterprises to support this, which is great. Um, and there's more of an emphasis on the kind of responsible, ethical approach of this too, which I think is
yeah.
fantastic, and more resources than ever before. So those are the major things I'm looking forward to.
That's awesome. Yeah, ship to prod, everybody. Let's do it. So it's,
Rip
it's
it.
just that easy. Yeah, awesome. Well, Reagan, it's great to talk to you. For people who want to learn more about you, how can they do that?
LinkedIn is probably the best way. So you can look us up either on our website, getalignai.com, or Rehgan Bleile on LinkedIn. You can find AlignAI on LinkedIn as well, but that is the best place.
Awesome, awesome, cool. Well, thanks for the fun chat. We'll see you
Yeah,
around.
thanks for having me on.
Yeah, of course.